No, I don't even know why I pretend to sing the Star Wars theme music. I genuinely don't. I guess I must have thought it was a good idea at the time. It most definitely isn't. And today is January the 19th, 2021. This is episode 48 of my Notcast, an ever increasingly infinite series where I talk about whatever comes to my mind in front of a camera. Now, today's episode is about Star Wars The Force Awakens, with 2015 Star Wars movie, the first movie to be made without the guiding hand of George Lucas. And the movie that I liked a lot when it came out, and in retrospect, not quite so much now. So let's think about how we're going to address this. This film has a lot of things to talk about in it, and for some reason, I'm going to manage to be able to get through almost all of it. I'm probably going to forget something because there's so much stuff around Star Wars. And of course, what you're absolutely clamouring for was yet another middle-aged dude talking about Star Wars movies on YouTube. There's a shortage of them, I think. I don't think there's enough videos about Star Wars on YouTube. And I think I'm going to have to add to that huge pile of surplus YouTube videos about Star Wars and about the sequel movies. So I'm going to start off really bluntly and tell you what I think I know about the production of the movie. So late 2010, 2011, I think George Lucas was thinking about, well, he wanted to move his career into the next phase. And by the next phase, what we mean is to move away from Star Wars. In order to move away from Star Wars, there's a degree of thinking that he had to do around that. Effectively, the thing that he thought was, if I make another Star Wars movie, I can make $400 million, and that's enough money for me to be able to go off into the sunset and to do what I want to do for the rest of my life. Because, George Lucas's career creatively had been focused around Star Wars since 1977. Sure, he'd done other things. He'd had a big hand in Indiana Jones, had a big hand in producing a number of movies, and some movies, of course, which you will have never heard of. He had his heart set on a film called Red Tails, which failed at the box office. And what he kind of wanted to do, really, and as I understand it, was to go off and make small little art house movies and indulge the projects he's had all through his life that he hasn't been able to do because he's been part of Star Wars. I'm just going to pause here because you might have just heard someone little squeak at me. I'm going to go and bring a cat. And here's Price. Price doesn't want to be held right now. He wanted to come into the room, to look at me, to judge me, and then to walk away. Price is... how old are you, dude? Oh, he's not talking to me now. Absolutely typical. So Price is about 6 months old. And he's generally really good. But he'll often, especially when I shut a door, he'll want to come in and have a chat with me. Normally, it's really weird, by the way, if you're going to the toilet and the cat's moaning at you, because the cat wants to come into the room and then stare intently at you. I mean, I don't get it, but, that's why I'm not a cat, right? So, George Lucas, 2012, wants to make he thinks he wants about $400 million, so he can effectively go off and retire and make movies at his own speed and his own pace, however he likes, whatever he wants to make them about. And as far as I know, he's probably been doing that, actually, in his retirement, making quiet movies, editing them, no commercial constraints, no pressures, all under non-disclosure agreements, films that nobody ever knows about. But first of all, he figures you need the money. So where Star Wars was in 2011, December 2012 was when the announcement was made, it was a bit long in the tooth. So Star Wars has had a couple of periods after the main films, the main trilogies have been made, where it's kind of faded a little from public view. If you look at Star Wars in 1995, 1996, it was geek stuff. There weren't Comic-Cons or anything like that at that point. They were very limited, very embryonic. So Star Wars was kind of that stuff that you liked when you were a kid, but nobody really liked it anymore. In 1995, 2011, for example, Star Wars obviously through the prequel trilogies managed to create a second life, brought a new generation into the fan base, but also where it had gone wrong so much as it had overstuffed itself. So there were the 6 seasons of the Clone Wars. And by the way, the Clone Wars is fantastic. You should watch it, but try and watch a condensed version of it. It's got some brilliant stuff in it. And George and Dave Filoni were all over the plotting for the Clone Wars. I think they did a great job there. There's Rebels, which I am not so fond of. And then there was the Clone Wars cartoon from 2003 that is absolutely brilliant and essential watching. But effectively, Star Wars has become a TV show and a series of video games. The video games weren't particularly good. And George Lucas decided that he was going to sell Lucasfilm to Disney for an enormous amount of money. I don't know exactly how much money it was. I'm sure it was announced at the time. And in December 2012, the deal was done. George handed Lucasfilm over to Disney, and then the House of the Mouse had it all. And I'm just going to take an extract here from this really quite useful book, which is The Art of The Force Awakens. October the 31st, 2012, the day after Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm and the public announcement that it happened. Disney didn't have a clue what they wanted to do. They'd taken the story ideas from George Lucas, but they also had the right to follow their own story ideas. And about a month after that, in that intervening month in November 2012, a couple of people that had worked on Star Wars previously, Doug Chiang, who'd done some of the art direction for Attack of the Clones, and I think it was Rick Carter as well, I think, contacted Lucasfilm and said, guys, if you're making another Star Wars movie, we'd like to be involved. We'd like to be involved in the design. And in late 2012, Lucasfilm brought on these design experts to start creating the movie. They hadn't got a plot, they hadn't got a direction, they hadn't got a script writer, they hadn't got a director, they hadn't got any of that. So Force Awakens is a film that has been made by concept artists. First and foremost is the concept artist presented Lucasfilm with ideas. And effectively it was almost like a call list, and it was like, well look, you can get this, you can get all these things here, we can put these into the movie, you just have to shoehorn the bits in. Now Kubrick has the idea of what he calls the submersible units in a movie, which is that if you get 6 submersible units, that is 6 scenes that stand up really, really well, and then the next step that you've got is you've got to just put the connective tissue together to make the rest of the narrative work, which is how they approached The Force Awakens, is that they went through the concept art. As far as I understand, we'll have that, we'll have that, we'll have that, we'll have that. We'll stick all these things together, and then we'll try and make a story that touches upon their story beats, or their story ideas. Of course, here's one. There's been a concept art, the Millennium Falcon flying through the inside of a Star Destroyer. Whoa, that'll be cool. We'll stick that in the movie. And the problem is that you end up with a film that was designed by committee, and a film that doesn't have that single overarching singular vision by an auteur, and that's where I think The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogies really suffer. Is they're films that are made by committee. There are films that have the rough edges and the crazy ideas blunted out and smoothened out and sandpapered out and replaced by things that are bland and focus grouped. Now I have a lot of criticism for parts of the prequel trilogies, the sequel trilogies, and I'm going to explain why when I get to it later on. But clearly, the idea was, well, we have this giant thing and it can blow up a planet, and we'll stick it in the movie because it looks really bloody cool, and we'll work out how all that stuff makes sense later. It's not how to make a movie, right? It's how to make a video game. And sometimes watching The Force Awakens feels like watching a video game that's made out of nothing but cutscenes, and you can't influence the output or the out control or the outcome or anything. So it's basically the Force Awakens is a Star Wars movie in one way and not in another. Now, a lot of people think, well, what is Star Wars? And I've got to be blunt, Star Wars is a feeling. You know when you see Star Wars, and you know when you're not looking at Star Wars, and you know that Star Trek sure as heck ain't Star Wars. And I kind of got the feeling that J.J. Abrams made the Star Trek movies because he really wanted a major franchise with Star in the title, and it just happened to be that Star Wars wasn't available. And after having seen the abomination that is Star Trek Into Darkness, I'm firmly of the belief that no one should ever let J.J. Abrams touch a movie camera ever again. He's good at visuals. He is terrible at picking a script. I'm going to go explain why I think The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and that other film, The Rise of Skywalker, are not particularly good. But I'll get particularly scathing about The Rise of Skywalker later on. The Force Awakens is basically fan fiction. It's a story that doesn't need to be told, that exists because Disney have invested a lot of money into it, and they're running out of time before the actors from the original trilogy start to die. I think that was where they were going with this. They were like, well, it's been 30 years since Return of the Jedi. We have to make a movie now, because if we don't make a movie now, they're going to be dead. And obviously, Carrie Fisher died during the production of Last Jedi, and so therefore, all her scenes in any subsequent films were made out of outtakes, and it really looks like it. And that's not a criticism of them; they did a very good job with what they had. But having read Colin Trevorrow's script for The Rise of Skywalker, I can confirm that The Rise of Skywalker, as released, is not the best Star Wars film ever. But I think I'm jumping ahead of myself there. I'm going to take there's a theory that works in politics, and I think I'm also going to apply this to The Force Awakens and to characters. The characters in Star Wars, The Force Awakens, the new characters that are introduced, Poe, Rey, Kylo Ren, Finn, really a film should be the most exciting and important day of their lives. And now, up to that point, probably The Force Awakens is the most exciting day in their lives. But just because you're a character in a film doesn't mean that you have character. It doesn't mean you're necessarily memorable. And sometimes when I'm watching these films, the sequel films, I forget that the characters are actually human beings. They don't necessarily demonstrate personalities. They don't demonstrate idiosyncrasies. They don't demonstrate tastes. It's almost as if the characters in the film are designed to be plot ciphers and plot robots. And their job is to say this and go there and do that and do the other thing, and then make the plot happen, and then we can get to the thing that the concept artist has made on this page here, where we've got something on Jakku, a desert planet, and we need to make sure we've got this shot of a Star Destroyer because it looks like a Star Destroyer, but it's better and newer and souped up, and it's new and improved like Colgate. And the problem you've got there is that you've got characters that aren't interesting. Now, they're going to sound very, very bitchy, but go with it. But some of the new characters that we've got in The Force Awakens don't follow what I call the beer and a puppy test. And the beer and a puppy test is the thing that also applies to politics, is if you were going to vote for a politician, what kind of politician would you vote for? Now, I follow the beer and a puppy test when it comes to politicians, which is if I vote for a politician, it's because it's someone that I either want to have a beer with or I would trust with having a puppy. And if you don't want to have a beer with a politician and you wouldn't trust them with a puppy, you sure as heck fire shouldn't trust them with a government or a country. And you shouldn't trust characters that fail the beer and a puppy test with having lead roles in movies unless they're the bad guy. At which point, if you can trust the bad guy with a beer and a puppy, do not give them the part. They are not that bad. They're not that evil. And clearly, when you look at Kylo Ren, and by the way, I have no idea which page I'm going to in this, when you look at, the emo Han Solo son, and you look at Kylo Ren and you go, right, so you're clearly the bad guy because you're dressed all in black and you've got a face mask. Now, what we're sure with this movie is that there's not a story that needs to be told. And it's actually crushed by the weight of expectations. No matter how good The Force Awakens is, it would never be good enough to satisfy some people. And by the way, I came out of that movie being really, really enthusiastic about it. It felt like Star Wars. The bit where Han throws his head round the corner and says to Chewie, we're home, when they get onto the Millennium Falcon, that's Star Wars. That's tears in your eyes moment where you think, my God, film can recapture the feelings I had when I was a child. But it's not a story that needs to be told. And I'm going to explain why. Because you've got people in this movie and they do what they want to do. And what people that write movies occasionally forget is that characters are their own people. They make bad and flawed decisions because those are the decisions that they make. Because they're human, they're flawed, they're illogical, they're emotional. They do things that feel good to them as opposed to things that advance the plot onwards. And the characters in The Force Awakens don't feel always fully realised. I think that the actors and actresses did a great job with it. John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, Daisy Ridley, the guy that plays Kylo Ren, whose name I've forgotten, Adam Driver. they do a really, really good job with the material, but the characters aren't convincing to me as characters. Sometimes they feel like plot robots, and I really hate plot robots because plot robots aren't real. Plot robots exist to advance the story and the plot. They don't exist as people with their own narrative, their own feelings, their own heroisms. And you've got to remember, everybody in a movie is the hero of their own life. And this is what sometimes people forget. Now, there's a great scene in this, by the way, where you've got three of the stormtroopers walking down a corridor. It's not this scene, but let's pretend it is. And they hear that Kylo Ren is losing his temper and having a temper tantrum, and they're just like, doo, 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 and they just turn around, walk backwards, and walk out of the scene. And you need more scenes like that, where characters whose names you don't even know behave in a relatable manner that's human and real, as opposed to anything else. Now, the problem that we've got with The Force Awakens is that it's the same old forces and the same old faces that you're reckoning with here in this movie. And Luke evolved, and Luke followed the same path that all the other Jedi have evolved. You watch, A New Hope, stroke Star Wars from 1977. Where's Obi-Wan Kenobi? He's hiding in the wilderness, not making a mess of anything, and keeping a distant eye upon his Padawan's children. Where's Yoda? Well, he's hiding out on Dagobah, going slowly mad and forgetting how to formulate sentences correctly, whilst Frankos has his hand up his backside. That's what these characters are doing. Luke Skywalker is the only character that really demonstrated much in the way of development from the original trilogy. Han Solo is still the daring do guy, but he's a bit old now. He reminds you of the really old fella that's got the really young girlfriend, and the young girlfriend never sticks around particularly long. And Leia is just, she's become a stateswoman in this movie, and she does a great job with it. But again, you're going, is this the path that the characters that we would have seen in the movies, is this the path that they would have been laid out to follow? And the problem that we have is that this movie is one giant mystery box. It is a common criticism of J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams is very, very good at planting mysteries and not answering them. And you can get away with that shit if you're making a TV show. You can't get away with that shit in Star Wars, because Star Wars should be better. Star Wars should be the best storytelling. It's got some of the best visuals, it's got some of the best music, it's got some of the best performances. The story needs to be better than the story that is being told in the sequel movies. And that is a plain and incontrovertible fact. And as we've seen from the information that's in here, they started off with a bunch of concept art, and they bastardized the story so that somehow the film would represent that. So, for example, Doug Chang said, I think about roughly a month after Lucasfilm announced that it had been purchased, Kathleen Kennedy reached out to them and said, even though we don't have a script or a director yet, let's start this process. And starting this process means creating a huge amount of fancy images and then working out how the hell are you going to shoehorn this into a script because it looks good. And that's not good enough with Star Wars. It's not convincing. I watch movies because the plots have to be good. You've got your 6 submersible units. The story has to match up. The connective tissue has to work. Because if the connective tissue has to work, then the patient is dead. And I think this is where the sequel movies don't work. J.J. Abrams' mystery box is bullshit. It is lazy, poor storytelling by somebody that thinks the only thing you've got to do is ask a question and not come up with the answer. Questions are really, really easy. Answers are hard, and being able to provide answers to the questions in a movie is the difference between being competent at storytelling and being incompetent at storytelling. Now, I'm going to throw out some questions that no one's ever thought about in terms of what no one's got a definitive answer for. What's the meaning of life? Is there a God? Do ghosts exist? Those are questions. Very easy to ask those questions. Hard questions are ones you've got answers for. And all J.J. Abrams is doing the easy bit, which is asking the questions. He's putting mysteries into the box. He's not solving the mysteries. He hopes you're going to forget about the mysteries later on, so he doesn't have to give an answer. Okay? And that's just lazy crap storytelling by people that aren't good enough at the job. There is a lot of great minds out there that are creative in terms of a storytelling ability. They have the ability to set up questions, throw answers in later on, have an overarching arc that answers and resolves all the elements correctly and successfully. And many of them write books for Lucasfilm. There are wonderful series of books called A Certain Point of View, which are short stories that are set in and around the universes of the original films. And each one of those has more imagination and more integrity and more storytelling power in than Force Awakens, which is a focus group set of images that has been designed to pull together a response and for you to go, oh look, he's the baddie, he's wearing a space mask, that's an interesting animal, it looks like something out of something, blah blah blah. That's not good enough, guys. It really isn't good enough, because the problem with The Force Awakens is that the rebels don't have a plan. In Star Wars, they had a plan. In Empire Strikes Back, they had a plan. In Return of the Jedi, they had a plan. Here, they're making it up as they go along, and they're doing it on the hoof, and all of a sudden they're finding out about some base that's bigger and better and badder and worse. And it's just no good, in my opinion, because one of the things that made Star Wars work was meaning. Okay, so when you were looking at the original movies and you were looking at, for example, a Jawa Sandcrawler or IG-88 or Ugnaughts or whatever it was, you looked at that and you knew there was a story behind that and somebody had given some thought to that story. Here, they've just gone, let's just get a bunch of cool shit and smoosh it all together and then hope that it works. Films that are great at world building will hint and drop at and have an internal narrative and a logic, and there's a whole bunch of stories that are happening off screen. And The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai in the Eighth Dimension is a great example of that, and The Force Awakens is a terrible example of it, because it thinks that if you just peter in enough meaningless detail that doesn't have a context around it, that somehow people are going to believe that there's this whole fully formulated backstory. But when you pull on the thread, it unravels the whole of the rest of the jumper and it doesn't work. Now, we've got, and that's demonstrated in dirty technology. It's demonstrated in a whole bunch of things, because everything looked kit bashed. It wasn't new and shiny. In this movie, everything just doesn't feel like it's got an internal narrative and life, and in a monologue that exists once the camera's not pointing at it. That's why it's not convincing to me, and that's why I've said that it's a movie that feels like it's been made by committee, is that 8 people have sat around and went, right, we need a big explosion at the end. We need something that's like a Death Star but bigger, because the last 2 times the Empire made a Death Star and that didn't work. Yeah, sure, we'll do another Death Star, that's fine. We won't learn from our mistakes. We'll make it bigger than the last one that was bigger than the one before it. It's not good enough. I do not like the sequel movies, not because I'm some kind of snob, but just because the storytelling isn't good enough in those 3 movies for me to invest my time in it. Now, we've got loads of other things about the movie that I'm not a fan of. We've got stormtroopers they can't see what they're doing, and they're not very good at doing things. The stormtroopers are people doing things, and for the first time in the movies, you get the stormtroopers are given their own backstory. Obviously, Finn is a stormtrooper that's become a stormtrooper because he needs a job. Whereas obviously previously it was all clones. But what you don't have is that sense of the end of an empire. Like if you watch Downfall and you see that Hitler's hanging out with children that are 12 or 13 in Nazi uniforms. There's no sense of that's going on in The Force Awakens, and I was not convinced at all that The Force Awakens is particularly a good movie. It's a shot by shot, scene by scene. It is a remake of A New Hope with some slightly different characters. Now, there's lots of really good things about it, by the way. Lots of really good things about it. Before you think I spend the whole time just kicking the movie and punching it when it's down. And since I've been showing you bits from the book, I might as well show you bits from the Blu-ray as well for a little while. Here's the 3D Blu-ray, which has a whole bunch of bonus features once you slip it off. Now, for example, that's okay, but there's a lightsaber fight. So it's like they're using combinations of visuals that you haven't necessarily seen before in a way that's new and unusual. Jakku, desert planet. Seen that, mate. You've got the ice planet at the end. I can't remember what it's called. It's Hoth with trees. You know what I mean? And it's got wonderful bits of brutalist architecture in there. But there's going to come a time when you're going to run out of old, unused, and rejected Ralph McQuarrie paintings before things start to look weird and different. Now, it feels like I've spent 20 minutes kicking Force Awakens. I'll tell you what does work. General Hux is great, brilliant character. And I don't think he gets enough screen time in any of the movies. I think Poe Dameron is really, really interesting because he's a cocky, somewhat useless sod who's just goes ahead and does what his gut instinct tells him is the right thing to do when it isn't. I think Rey is really interesting, but the idea that somehow she's got to belong to a lineage of famed and fated people doesn't really work. I think that there's another couple of characters. Kylo Ren's really interesting, but having him as basically My Chemical Romance and their lightsaber, it's not really like an emo bad guy. It's not. It's taking Teenage Rebellion a bit far. I don't think that the character necessarily is fully fleshed out, but Adam Driver delivers him brilliantly. I think Finn, they don't know what to do with Finn. They really, really don't. His character's arc throughout the 3 films is not resolved satisfactorily at all. It's like they got an idea around it, but they kind of fudged it and dropped the ball halfway through. And I'll get really, really scathing about the Rise of Skywalker because effectively Finn just hangs around doing nothing for huge chunks of the movie, apart from telling Ray that I've got something to tell you. Oh, what is it? No, it can't wait. There's a huge element of hand wavium in all of the sequel movies, which I think is really desperately poor. And hand wavium, by the way, is the bit where someone goes, "Oh, I haven't got time for that now. I can't explain that now. It's too busy. You wouldn't understand. Cloning doesn't matter. They've just got a planet-sized thing called a star killer that sucks up suns and blows up planets. And yeah. And by the way, we've got an empire now, but we didn't have an empire, but we do. But someone's bankrolling us, but I don't know who, and we don't know how we pay for them. Don't think about that. Just think about the visuals. Think about spaceships and stuff. So I seem more grumpy than I actually am about The Force Awakens. As the first of 3 films, The Force Awakens is a great opening shot. It's a great opening salvo to a trilogy. But if you're going to ask the questions, you have to answer them later on. Otherwise, you're wasting our time. You've invested us in a story that you're not telling us. It's narratively, it's a bait and switch. I think the second thing is the payoff from The Force Awakens is expected to come in films 2 and 3. Sometimes it never arrives. The third thing is, it's 5 years now, so I think we can get to spoilers here, is that as the first film of any of the Star Wars trilogies, they always manage to kill one of the major characters, and one of the major characters dies in this movie. And I knew from the moment that I saw the bridge, I knew exactly who was going to kill who and why and when and how. And it would have been nice for us to have actually had a narrative switch around that, so that it hadn't been a character that we'd seen throughout a number of previous movies. It'd been one of the new characters that died a senseless death for no reason, and then suddenly, in much the same way you had with Tasha Yar in the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, you would have suddenly gone, "Oh God, they aren't mucking about, are they? They're not taking prisoners. They're killing your major stars halfway through the movie." And I think that would have been stronger and better. Ultimately, The Force Awakens is like watching a tribute band version of Star Wars, or maybe a reformed version of a band that you loved, which has only got 2 of the original guys in, and it's got a new bass player, because it's always a new bass player when a band reforms. A new drummer, a new guitar player, maybe a new keyboardist or a new singer. It looks like the band that you loved when you were younger from a distance. If you took your glasses off when you were drunk and you were going, yeah, it sounds like them, but you put your glasses on, you go, yeah, sure as hell isn't them. And especially the franchise doesn't necessarily grow old in a dignified way through The Force Awakens. Hang on, need a drink. So, The Force Awakens, I've had a drink now, by the way, because I coughed, went down the wrong way, I needed to have a drink. The Force Awakens feels like watching a tribute band version of Star Wars. Is not quite the same. or maybe, you know, when people do vegan sausages and they really don't taste like actual sausages. No criticism to vegan sausages, but they're not for me. I can tell the difference. The Force Awakens feels like a film that's been made by committee. It's had all the rough edges smoothed out. It's had all the personality smoothed out of it. The characters aren't convincing to me as people. They don't act like they're the heroes in their own stories necessarily. They're logical plot robots on occasions that do things because that's what the plot dictates that they need to do. The story has a large number of mystery box questions that are asked, but it doesn't answer any of the answers because it hasn't worked out what the answers are. The most important thing around this is it brings you in with questions, and it then promises to answer them, but it never answers the questions, which is narratively unforgivable. It's the laziest type of narrative bait and switch that we can have, and the film is drearily plotted in so much as it follows your standard Star Wars tropes of either running into or running out of things. Evasion and infiltration, I've heard it called. Where you're either hiding from the bad guys or you're sneaking into the bad guys' place to stop them being bad guys. That's pretty much the movie. Alongside, we've got a new Death Star, but we can't call it a Death Star, so we're going to call it a Star Killer because it kills stars, as opposed to a star that does death. And you know, you've got your other characters, and it just doesn't feel cohesive. It feels like it's a bunch of set pieces that are put together to deliver a certain outcome. There's a couple of brilliant moments in it, by the way. That opening sequence with Max von Sydow, where Kylo Ren holds a blaster fire and just keeps it mid-air by force power. I mean, that's the type of stuff where they should have put that degree of care and thought and attention into the whole of the movie. But it does feel like a movie that's been made by committee, a movie where people have had to shoehorn visual images in because concept artists have thought it would look really cool. And that's their job. Their job is to make things look really, really cool and not to worry about the plot. But if you're going to put things that look really, really cool in, make sure it's in service of the plot and not in service of the visual. The reason Star Wars was so good, the original films, was because it was all in service of the plot and the world felt real. It felt like you could reach out and touch that world, and there were things that were happening just out of shot. In The Force Awakens, I don't feel that. I'm not convinced by the world in there. The world building isn't good enough, it isn't strong enough, and the narrative isn't a story that needs to be told. Effectively, Luke Skywalker is the MacGuffin. He's the missing spark plug from the Phantom Menace, and people are looking for him because reasons? And it's never really explained. And yeah, we've got this thing, except we have to find a map, but we've got a missing. If you think about the plot for The Force Awakens for more than about 6 minutes, the whole thing falls apart. And it's something which infuriates me when I watch films, is when I'm watching films and I go, I'm smarter than the plot of this film. You know, Star Trek Into Darkness looks like the script was written in crayon by that incompetent amateur, Damon Lindelof, who has managed to perpetrate gross fraud upon the cinema industry by making them make his appalling, incoherent, illogical, boneheadedly stupid nonsense. You know, if you watch a film that Damon Lindelof has written, it's the equivalent of watching a very, very expensive golden monkey piss into its own mouth. And then telling you that the joke's on you because you paid to watch it, you sucker. The Force Awakens is nowhere near that level of contempt. It's clearly a movie that's been made with love and with passion, but what it doesn't have is a script that can carry the weight of both the expectations and the craftsmanship that surrounds it. So, I'm going to kick The Force Awakens. Time has made it a worse film, and I'm very sad to say that because I really, really wanted to have 3 great Star Wars movies in my life. I didn't really want the best Star Wars movie, or more correct, I didn't really want the last really great Star Wars movie I saw to be Revenge of the Sith. Luckily it wasn't, because Rogue One exists, but aside from Rogue One, none of the films that have come out under the Star Wars banner in the past few years have really felt Like they really, really understand Star Wars. You know, The Last Jedi gets really, really close, and I think the world of The Last Jedi. But The Force Awakens is, out of the 9 films that are officially Star Wars movies, The Force Awakens is the 8th of those movies. And it brings me no pleasure to say that it is, in my opinion, better than Skyfall and worse than Moonraker and worse than Quantum of Solace even. So the next episode about Star Wars I'm going to talk about is about either Rogue One or The Last Jedi. I haven't yet decided, because obviously the world needs more videos about Star Wars. Certainly nothing is as bad as the holiday special, but since I'm going to pretend the holiday special doesn't exist, which is the right thing to believe, I'm going to end and close here by just wrapping up and saying The Force Awakens, I did not like it. I do not rate it. It is a film that feels like it's been made by committee. The script isn't good enough to carry the weight of both expectations and the characters. The characters are poorly written. And if you think that I could do better, I know damn well I couldn't. I play to my strengths. And one of the things that I'm good at is not writing Star Wars movies, but maybe get someone else in to write the plot. And instead of thinking about a movie as a series of set pieces that's held together by blue tack, hope, and audience expectations, write a script that's worthy of the name Star Wars. And when we get to The Rise of Skywalker, I will take my gloves off and I will drag that film down an alley and I will give it a beating to within an inch of its life, because that film was an embarrassment to the name. It makes The Force Awakens look like Citizen Kane, and it brings me no pleasure to say that. One thing that no film should have is the moment which I call the bullshit moment. And I've heard the bullshit moment, where something's happening and someone in the audience goes, bullshit, at the top of their voice. I saw it when I saw the less than amazing Terminator Salvation in 2009 at the cinema. I saw the film heckled by somebody in the audience who, it wasn't me, that went, that's bullshit, at the top of their voice, and everybody heard it because the thing that was happening in the movie at the time was bullshit. The Force Awakens doesn't have a bullshit moment, okay? It doesn't, and that's probably the best thing I can say about it. It was a film made with love and passion, but not necessarily with narrative integrity or flair. It's a series of set pieces designed to amuse you and separate you from your money and keep you entertained for about 2 hours in a movie theatre and make Disney's investment worthwhile. It's not the worst Star Wars movie. It's very close to being the worst Star Wars movie. I really, really enjoyed some parts of it, but it's not good enough. And I think I'm going to stop there because I can, because other videos on the internet rubbishing The Force Awakens are available. They are no doubt more professional and more better structured in how they're pulled together. The next Star Wars episode, I did say I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. It's probably going to be The Last Jedi, but I'm not sure when that's going to be. As per normal, I put up a list of potential subjects on Twitter, and the one that gets the most votes wins. Today, the one that got the most votes and won was The Force Awakens. The one that was in second place was, I don't know, Bears, which I don't quite know how I'm going to approach that one, so I might not do that one in future. As usual, don't be a dick in the comments, and I will see you again sometime, hopefully not too long from now. Bye. See you soon.